Hello everybody, here we are today talking about James Reimer, who has been the best goalie for the Buffalo Sabres this season. But before we get started with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So the Buffalo Sabres are having, again, another Buffalo Sabres-esque season, and this comes at a time where they sit last in the Eastern Conference and then 29th in the league standings. That is not exactly how they probably drew it up before the start of the year. But things don't really seem to be going any type of way that Buffalo probably draws it up when we look at the past decade plus. And yeah, things have been kind of rough. But I think with a lot of those really rough seasons, not just for Buffalo, but for other teams, it kind of brings out some unique stories to talk about for these teams along the way for the course of each year. And in this case, it brings us to today's subject, which is, of course, James Reimer. Now, Reimer isn't really a rookie in the league, as he's been in the NHL for about 15 seasons now and has over 200 career wins. This should be a guy that his career is kind of winding down. But I think in a way it's kind of not for Reimer, as he has been Buffalo's best goalie for the course of the season. Now, I know the sample size is very, very small, less than 10 games, but it is kind of interesting because you have a goalie that is this old playing on a team that is this bad and is outperforming his younger counterparts that certainly have higher and bigger expectations at this stages of their career. But he just seems to be kind of throwing all that aside at the moment, and I think a lot of fans are smiling for one reason or another, whether it is you being genuinely appreciative of seeing a veteran goalie go out there and have kind of a little bit of a resurgence, or just you kind of laughing at what has occurred this season for Buffalo, including a 13-game losing streak, really isn't important. What is important is, of course, James Reimer's season. Now, am I saying that this is the most important season of his career? Absolutely not, as he's kind of had an interesting career. I think when I got back into hockey as a young teenager, I was just, kind of following everything in the league, and Reimer was one of those guys. But this is certainly kind of an interesting story here, as Reimer leads the team for things like goals against average, things like save percentage, things like goals saved above average, and then, of course, as well, too, quality start percentage. And this is interesting. Looking at some of these, we can kind of go just towards the obvious here. His goals against average being 2.55 with the Buffalo Sabres is good compared to numbers like what we see with Devin Levi. I believe it's 4.12, very, very high. And then you have UPL, which is, I believe, 3.05 at the course of this season. My apologies, 3.02 for UPL. But you can kind of see from what we're talking about here, he is the only goalie that is really flirting with a 9-10 save percentage for the course of the season, and he's only allowed more than 3 goals, I think, once with the Buffalo Sabres. Things can get muddled because he did play a little bit earlier in the year with the Anaheim Ducks, but the point still stands that at this stage of his career, you will probably just be watching him and saying, oh, it's good that he's still out there. Instead, he's kind of making you get out of that recliner a little bit and say, that is James Reimer. I'm not old. He is still going out there and having some performances that kind of leave you a little bit impressed. But yeah, that's just, again, neither here nor there. It just makes me happy talking about this. But I think at the end of the day, the reality of all these things is that it is still kind of an utter disaster for Buffalo. He was claimed off waivers after his 2-game stint with the Anaheim Ducks and is a guy that is turning 37 in less than a month. We actually have a lot closer birthdays than I realized, so that is also really cool. But he is their best goalie at this stage of the season, 37 years old, soon to be, and a guy that's claimed off waivers kind of gives you an indication where this season is really going for them. If you would have said at the start of the year, yeah, Reimer is going to be your best goalie, yeah, Buffalo fans would probably say, oh, I can see where this is headed, and I'm not very thrilled about it because it's another year outside of the playoffs. And I think it's kind of concerning, especially with Devin Levi, young guy that is seemingly kind of developing backwards. His numbers are kind of going in the opposite direction every year. I'm going to be the first to say that he's only played, I think, like 39, 40 games in the league so far. Goalies take a little bit longer to develop, especially on a team where it's not exactly perfect. But still, at the same time, too, I don't think that Buffalo Sabres fans would just say, well, there's no reason at all to panic about his career path, especially seeing that he was part of the Sam Reinhart trade. Sam is living a good life down in Florida, obviously within their division, having a lot of success, getting paid a lot of money, and then recently winning the Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers. I think it's just tough knowing that a player like that is, of course, gone from you, and you're saying, well, he won a Stanley Cup, and we've never won one before in franchise history, and this goalie may not be the guy for us going forward. Then you have UPL. He had a really good year last year, despite the fact that the Buffalo Sabres didn't have a great year. Again, things did not go the way they had hoped for. And then you're thinking, well, if he can have a good year, even when we're kind of down, maybe if we have a bit of an improved year and he's consistent, then we really could jump up in the standings. Instead, kind of just getting stuck in the mud with this team. Now, is it all their faults? Is it the fact that Reimer has just dunked in the fountain of youth and that these two guys stink? The answer to that is absolutely not. And that's because this team isn't super great defensively. They are not ideal at 5-on-5. They're not ideal at even strength. And they're actually one of the worst teams in the league defensively on the power play, not the PK, the power play. And that is a little bit ironic because, again, Buffalo's power play is also one of the worst when it comes to scoring. So odd, but again, it does happen. And it is really, I'm trying to find a word that is kind of kid-friendly. It's unfortunate, I guess, if you want to go that route. But these are just kind of things that continue to be a problem. Now, I think one of the weird things about this is that so many things could kind of be considered a success in a lot of ways, or you would have figured that things would have been turned around for them at the start of the year. Got back Lindy Ruff, a coach that had seen the most success with him in a very long time. There were really hardly any peaks at all. I'm going to just say none when he ended up leaving. A lot of valleys. Seems like just a cave or a mountain that just falls off a cliff and all that. Instead, what do? They bring him back. Then they have Rasmus Dahlin that is averaging close to a point per game. And again, that is a fantastic thing for a defenseman like him who has proven to be probably one of the mainstays for Buffalo and a player that's nice to see that former first overall pick sticking around in Buffalo, as well as the fact that the team overall last year had one of the worst first period goal differentials in the league. I think it might have been the worst in the league when I recorded a video kind of talking about all that when they made the coaching changes and whatnot with Don Granato. But this year it's one of the better ones. So you would say, coach that had seen a lot of success with us before, one of our bigger name players having about a point per game, having a career year in that regard, and being flipped from one of the worst to one of the best teams in the first period, which I think really does set the tone and then kind of, help the way the game plays out over the course of the next 40 minutes. You would probably be saying, this Buffalo team is bound to at least be in the playoff conversation. No, they are dead last out of 16 teams in one conference, and it is kind of a wacky thing, like I talked about with that goal differential, but this kind of goes back to what has been a wacky season with what we've seen already with Reimer being their best goalie and just lays it all out to bear, and what has been another fruitless year for the Buffalo Sabres. We've talked before about the blue line being young, again, Byram and Power and Dahlin and just a lot of those things, seeing guys like Tage Thompson that probably will have, again, another relatively good scoring year and whatnot. And you just feel like there are kind of the pieces there to actually take that next step. But I'm not sold. I said at this season preview that I didn't think they'd probably end up making the playoffs this year, but I thought they'd be closer. I think that maybe without that 13-game losing streak, things would be a little bit different. But you really are going to have a hard time selling me on things going into next year. And while we can kind of smile about this and be happy for Reimer and think that this is a little bit funny, it again exposes bigger and more glaring issues for an organization that, could they get to 20 years without being in the playoffs? I think that is a real possibility. We live in a big league now. This is not something like in the 70s where the league was much smaller. And so I think that this playoff drought or these long playoff droughts could get even worse for some of these teams. And for an organization like Buffalo, not a marquee city to go to, not a rich history in terms of Stanley Cup success, and then just a lot of recent failures kind of add to what we've been talking about. So kind of lighthearted in some parts of this video, kind of really just not, again, anything that's great. And on the other end of that, but just kind of talking about the Buffalo Sabres as we gear up for US and Canada tonight. But anyway, what are your thoughts on all this? Again, as somebody that has seen Reimer from when I was a young teenager to where I'm at now, it is cool to see, but at the same time too, yeah, yikes. He has got like a 2-4-1 record with him, so it's unfortunate that he's not getting the win when things are going well, but again, I know that his use has been kind of sporadic. Anyway, that's it for my video. Please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe, have a great night, and go Falk, you're right.
Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.